A racist police officer rudely pushes a black woman in a parking lot, unaware that she is the police chief. Her powerful act of resistance not only shocks him, but also changes his life forever. This story is not just about justice. It's about courage, truth, and the strength to change an entire system. Before we begin, let us know where you're watching this video from in the comments. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you won't miss out on more inspiring stories. Now, let's get started. On a quiet night in the parking lot behind the police station, the dim streetlights cast faint reflections on puddles left after the rain. The sound of Jessica Carter's heels echoed, blending with the distant hum of the city. As the police chief of the city, she was no stranger to working late hours. After a long day of meetings and handling reports, Jessica planned only to retrieve a forgotten file from her car before heading home. As she opened the car door, a voice came from behind, rough and commanding. "Hey, stay right there. Step out of the car now." Jessica turned to find Jake Thompson, a well-known officer infamous for his conservative views and aggressive behavior. He approached her with a suspicious look. The dim lighting made it difficult for Jessica to recognize Jake immediately, but his demeanor spoke volumes. "I'm allowed to park here," Jessica said calmly but firmly. She was used to asserting her authority, especially in a challenging environment like the police department. But Jake wasn't listening. His gaze scanned Jessica from head to toe, lingering on her casual outfit. In his mind, she didn't look like someone who belonged there. His hand rested on his gun holster, his finger brushing the safety latch. "I don't care what you say," Jake sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Get out of here before I have to take more drastic measures." Jessica felt a surge of anger but remained composed. "You don't want to do this, Officer Thompson," she said, her voice firm. "I am the authority here." Her words fell on deaf ears. Jake stepped closer, his tone menacing. "I don't care who you think you are. Get out of the car, now." Before Jessica could react, Jake lunged forward, shoving her against the car. The impact caused her to stumble, her hands gripping the car door to steady herself. The physical pain was minor compared to the humiliation rising within her. Jake stood back, his eyes filled with mockery. "People like you don't belong here," he spat, his tone brimming with prejudice. Jessica straightened up, adjusted her coat, and looked him squarely in the eye. "What did you just say?" she asked, her voice low but powerful. Jake didn't flinch. "I said, you don't belong here. Get out, or I'll call for backup to handle you." Jessica took a deep breath, struggling to maintain her composure. She reached into her coat pocket, and Jake immediately gripped his gun, ready to draw. But what Jessica pulled out wasn't a weapon. It was a shiny badge, the unmistakable symbol of her authority as the highest-ranking officer in the department. "Chief of Police Jessica Carter," she said, her voice cold and steady. Jake's face turned pale, his eyes wide with shock. "You're the chief of police?" he stammered, his disbelief evident. Jessica took a step closer, her gaze piercing. "Yes," she replied, her tone like ice. "And let me remind you, I don't answer to you. On the contrary, you answer to me. Now tell me, what do you think you're doing?" Jake froze, unable to respond. The power he thought he held disappeared in an instant. Silence engulfed the parking lot, broken only by Jake's rapid breathing. He stepped back, fumbling for his phone. Quickly, he sent a message to a colleague. "I just did something stupid. Need your help to cover this up." Jessica saw everything but didn't stop him. She knew this was only the beginning. In the darkness of the parking lot, this confrontation wasn't just a personal mistake. It was the spark for a larger battle over power, justice, and truth that would challenge the entire department. Jake Thompson stood pale-faced, confronted with the reality of his actions. Jessica, cold and unyielding, stared him down. But within her, memories from the past began to surface. This wasn't the first time she had faced arrogance and prejudice. and it wouldn't be the last. Jessica Carter grew up in a poor neighborhood on the south side of the city. Narrow streets lined with dilapidated houses were home to working-class families like hers. Poverty wasn't just visible in the daily struggle for meals, but also in the eyes of people unjustly treated by the authorities. Her father, Marcus Carter, worked long hours in a steel factory to provide for the family. Despite the hardships, he always taught Jessica, justice doesn't come naturally. You have to stand up and fight for it. One night, when Jessica was 10 years old, an event occurred that shaped her life forever. Her father was driving the family home after a late shift when they were pulled over by the police for no clear reason. Their old car with its broken taillight made them a target. "What's a man like you doing in this area?" one officer sneered. Her father, exhausted but calm, explained he was simply driving his family home. But his patience wasn't enough to stop the officer from ordering him out of the car. When he refused, insisting he had done nothing wrong, they dragged him out, shoved him onto the car hood, and cuffed him in front of Jessica and her mother. It was the first time Jessica understood what injustice truly meant. She watched her father, the strongest man in her life, humiliated and treated like a criminal, just because of his appearance, just because of the car he had worked for a year to buy. Her mother cried, trying to shield Jessica from the scene, but Jessica couldn't look away. The anger, fear, and pain fused into a fierce resolve. She would never let anyone else endure this. From that day on, Jessica nurtured a dream of becoming a police officer, but not to be like the one she had seen that night. She wanted to change the system from the inside. She believed that only by holding a position of power could she protect people like her father, those without a voice in society. The road to the police academy was not easy. As one of the few women and a person of color, Jessica wasn't welcomed. Male colleagues often mocked her, seeing her more as a diversity quota than a real candidate. The whispers behind her back and the condescending looks became a daily reality, but Jessica refused to let it discourage her. When she started as a patrol officer, Jessica always chose night shifts in the city's most dangerous areas, places most of her colleagues avoided. She not only worked harder than anyone else, but also built trust with the community. Jessica listened to people's stories and helped resolve even the smallest issues without belittling anyone. Her empathy and ability to handle situations tactfully were soon recognized, that although it made some colleagues envious. In the following years, Jessica proved that she was not only deserving of her position, but excelled beyond expectations. When she was promoted to lieutenant, a colleague remarked, "They probably just need a woman of color to make their reports look good." Jessica didn't respond, but her swift promotion was the answer. She worked twice as hard to prove that she wasn't just part of the system, but someone who would change it. As she rose to the position of police chief, Jessica knew she would face even more scrutiny. Longtime officers like Jake Thompson didn't like her presence. They weren't used to a woman of color holding the highest position in the police department. They subtly opposed her, from offhand comments in meetings to quietly disobeying her orders. But Jessica never let that deter her. She thought of her father, of that fateful night. Those memories had sparked a fire within her that would never be extinguished. Every time she faced those condescending looks, she reminded herself she was doing the right thing. She wasn't just fighting for herself, but for all those who didn't have the chance to fight back. In the present, Jessica looked straight at Jake, who was still stumbling over his words. He had no idea that while he was trying to cover up his mistake, she was ready to face even worse. Jake was just a small part of the system she had vowed to change, and Jessica Carter was not someone who would give up easily. Jake Thompson walked into the police station the next morning with a calm exterior, but inside, his mind was boiling with anger. He knew he had made a serious mistake, by confronting Police Chief Jessica Carter. If the incident got out, his career would surely be ruined. But Jake wasn't the type to accept failure easily. In his mind, he had already devised a plan to protect himself and even turn the situation around. In the break room of the police station, Jake began recounting the events of the previous night to his close colleagues. But the story he told was twisted in a way that benefited him. "Jessica Carter is targeting me," he said, his voice full of resentment as he turned to Steve Cooper, his closest friend in the department. "She just wants to embarrass me because I don't agree with the way she runs things. This isn't about justice, Steve. This is personal." Steve raised an eyebrow, concern evident in his gaze. "Jake, if this gets to the higher-ups, especially with her badge as evidence, you could lose your badge." Jake smirked. "She may be the chief, but she's not the only one with power around here. Does she think she can change everything? We'll see about that." He didn't stop at just complaining to Steve. Jake continued to spread the story throughout the police department, but with each retelling, he added details that painted Jessica as an abuser of power. "She's trying to make an example of me to intimidate all of us," he told a group of officers. "Jessica Carter doesn't like people like us, those who maintain order. She wants to tear down everything we've built." Jake's words weren't just complaints. They spread like wildfire throughout the department, especially among those officers who already had biases against Jessica. A small group began secretly supporting Jake, backing him in meetings and sharing whispers behind Jessica's back. Some even sent anonymous threatening messages to Jessica, such as, "You won't keep this position for long," or "Watch your step." These messages didn't scare Jessica, but they reminded her that the battle was no longer just between her and Jake. It was a confrontation with an entire system that had been entrenched for too long. Not content with just stirring things up within the department, Jake decided to seek a more powerful ally. He arranged a private meeting with Patrick Holden, a powerful member of the city council. Patrick was a well-groomed, middle-aged man, but behind his polished exterior was a pragmatic individual who always supported the status quo. He had long seen Jessica as a threat, not because of what she had done wrong, but because the reforms she was pushing could disrupt the power network he was trying to protect. At a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city, Jake sat across from Patrick, recounting the events in the parking lot. But his story wasn't the truth. He painted Jessica as a leader abusing her power, deliberately targeting him for personal reasons. "She doesn't care about our job," Jake said, his voice filled with frustration. "She just wants to prove she has control, no matter the consequences." Patrick listened carefully, nodding occasionally. After Jake finished, Patrick flashed a cold smile. "Your story could be very useful," he said, his tone laden with implication. "Let me handle the rest." Soon after, articles began appearing in local news outlets with headlines like "Police Chief Jessica C., Leader or Abuser of Power," and "Internal Conflict." A police department on the brink of division quickly grabbed attention. The articles emphasized that Jessica was trying to change the department in a way that caused division rather than unity. Some even quoted anonymous officers accusing her of targeting honest people like Jake Thompson. Jessica wasn't surprised when these articles appeared. She knew that Jake and his group hadn't stopped spreading rumors, but she had no intention of backing down. Jessica knew she needed to act. The next morning, she sent out a summons for all officers to attend an emergency meeting. She wanted to confront the rumors, the criticisms, and the simmering challenges within the department head-on. The police station's main meeting room was more crowded than ever. Cold, scrutinizing stares followed Jessica as she entered, but she didn't falter. Standing at the podium, the bright light shining on her face, Jessica scanned the room before beginning. "Thank you all for being here today," she started, her voice firm. I know there has been a lot of gossip lately, a lot of stories and different opinions about the way I'm running this department. But we need to make one thing clear. Our duty is to protect and serve this community. And to do that, we must respect each other and uphold our values. She paused to observe the reactions. Some officers nodded in agreement, but others, especially Jake's supporters, looked cold and avoided her gaze. As Jessica continued to emphasize the importance of transparency and accountability, a voice suddenly interrupted from the back of the room. "Chief," a young officer, Ryan Davis, stood up. "I think the issue here isn't responsibility or transparency. The problem is you're breaking the traditions of this department. You're making us feel like enemies instead of colleagues." The atmosphere in the room became tense. Many turned to look at Ryan, some surprised by his boldness, while others nodded in agreement. Jessica stayed calm, but her gaze was sharp. "Ryan, I appreciate you speaking your mind," she responded, her voice not loud but clear enough for everyone to hear. "But let me make one thing clear. What I'm doing is not to break any tradition, but to correct the mistakes that have been allowed to fester for too long." She stepped down from the podium, moving closer to the crowd, and her strong gaze sweeping over everyone. "We cannot protect this community if we don't respect each other. If an officer feels they have the right to push others just because of bias, that is not a tradition to be proud of. If a system protects those who are wrong instead of protecting the truth, that is not a tradition I want to uphold." The room fell completely silent. Jessica knew she had touched on sensitive issues, but she wasn't afraid. "Ryan." She turned back to the young officer, her voice now softer. "You may think I'm fighting against you, but the truth is, I'm fighting for all of us. I want this department to be a place where anyone, whether they are part of the team or a member of the community, feels safe and respected. And if that makes some people uncomfortable, that is the price I'm willing to pay." Ryan sat back down, his face showing confusion. Jessica knew she couldn't change everyone's mind instantly, but she had planted the seeds for change. As the meeting ended, officers filed out of the room with varying reactions. Some quietly agreed with Jessica, but were too afraid to speak up. Others, especially Jake's group, grew even more discontent. The division within the department was now clearer than ever. Jake, sitting at the back of the room, observed everything without saying a word. As people began to disperse, first he turned to Steve and whispered, "She's trying to split us apart, but this isn't over. We'll show her who holds the power." From her office, Jessica watched through the window as officers filed out after the meeting. She knew she had caused a deep rift, but she also knew it was necessary to peel back the layers of pretense that had been hiding the department's true issues. This battle was no longer just about her or Jake. It was about the future of the entire system she was trying to change. But Jessica was ready to face any challenge as long as she held firm to her belief. Justice and transparency were never negotiable. After the meeting, Jake Thompson returned to his office, filled with outrage. Jessica's words still echoed in his mind like an insult. He knew that if he didn't act immediately, she would continue to overpower him and make him an example for everyone else. Jake not only wanted to protect himself, but also wanted Jessica to pay the price. That evening in his apartment, Jake called a well-known figure in the legal world, attorney Richard Lane. Richard was famous for defending controversial officers, often appearing in the media with strong arguments in defense of his clients. Jake recounted his story, of course not forgetting to edit it so he appeared as a victim of abusive power. "She's trying to ruin my career because I don't agree with the way she runs things," Jake said, his voice full of anger. "I need someone like you to help me handle this." Richard listened carefully, then replied in a calm but sharp voice, "I've seen cases like this before. We don't just need to resist. We need to control the narrative. I'll help you, but you need to follow my guidance." The very next day, Jake officially filed a complaint with the city council accusing Jessica of discrimination and abuse of power. In the complaint, he stated that Jessica was using her position to target officers with differing views, and that she was breaking long-standing traditions of the police department to push a personal agenda. Not stopping there, Richard Lane began using his media connections to manipulate public opinion. Within days, articles appeared in abundance on local news websites with headlines like "Police Chief Jessica Carter, Reformist or Saboteur," and "Jessica Carter's controversial leadership is pushing the police department to the brink." One article in particular distorted the facts, describing Jessica as an arrogant and autocratic leader willing to sacrifice the stability of the police department to pursue personal goals. The article quoted anonymous officers who supported Jake, accusing Jessica of routinely undermining colleagues' credibility and using her power for personal revenge. The pressure from public opinion quickly mounted. During public meetings of the city council, some residents questioned Jessica's leadership abilities. They demanded an investigation into the allegations Jake had raised. The media seized the opportunity, relentlessly pursuing Jessica for a response, but Jessica refused to answer, instead focusing on her daily work. One evening, sitting in her office, Jessica opened her laptop and read the articles attacking her. The criticism, the malicious comments from the public weighed heavily on her heart, but she didn't let them discourage her. Jessica understood that when she stood up to change the system, she had accepted that this would be a tough battle. Alan Rodriguez, the deputy chief of police and Jessica's most trusted ally, entered the office. He placed a cup of hot coffee on her desk, his eyes full of concern. "Are you okay, Jessica?" he asked. Jessica looked up, giving him a tired smile. "Not really, but I prepared myself for this. I knew Jake wouldn't stop." Alan nodded. "We'll support you, but right now the city council is under immense pressure. They might call for an official investigation into you." Jessica took a deep breath, her eyes gleaming with determination. "Let them investigate. I haven't done anything wrong, and I will prove that, but I won't let anyone or anyone else manipulate the truth." Meanwhile, Jake and Richard continued to push their campaign. Richard arranged for Jake to participate in a television interview where he appeared with a pensive and distressed look. "I just want to do my job well," Jake said in front of the camera, "but I'm being forced to remain silent because I disagree with the way Chief Carter runs things. This is not how our police department should operate." Jake's words, carefully crafted by Richard, continued to divide public opinion. Some people supported him, seeing him as a victim of abusive power, while others began to question Jessica's true motives. Still, Jessica knew that the truth would always win out, but it wouldn't come easily. With every move Jake made, she understood that this battle wasn't just about power. It was about honor and integrity, and she was ready to face whatever awaited her. After several days of relentless pressure from the media and continuous accusations from Jake Thompson and his lawyer, Jessica Carter remained determined. She knew that the truth was her strongest weapon, but bringing it to light in a system deeply ingrained with secrecy was an arduous challenge. One late evening, as Jessica was reviewing documents in her office, her email inbox suddenly notified her of a new message. The subject line simply read, "The truth you need to know." Inside was a brief message and a series of attachments. "Chief Carter, you're not alone in this fight. What Jake Thompson and his associates are doing is not simply spontaneous. It is part of a protection system that senior officers have built over the years to cover up misconduct. I hope these documents will help you see the bigger picture, but be careful. They won't hesitate to ruin anyone to keep this secret." Jessica clicked on the attachments, and what she saw made her heart race. They were records, internal emails, and minutes from closed meetings dating back years all showing the existence of an underground system of privilege within the police department. The system was operated by a small group of senior officers who had exploited their power to protect favored officers from being held accountable. Jake Thompson, as Jessica discovered, wasn't just an arrogant officer acting on a whim. He had been protected for years by a tangled web of powerful individuals. The documents clearly showed that Jake had been reported for a series of misconducts, ranging from excessive use of force to discriminatory behavior, but all complaints had been dismissed or mysteriously disappeared. Jessica stopped when she came across a particularly suspicious file. It was a list of names detailing the officers who had received special protection, along with their offenses. One of the most prominent names was Jake Thompson, but what shocked Jessica even more was the involvement of some senior officers who were still working in the department, including those who frequently criticized and doubted her. One internal email from a few years ago especially caught Jessica's attention. In it, a senior officer wrote, "We need to keep Jake safe. He's an important part of our team, and no one has the right to disrupt that. If necessary, handle the complaints before they reach the disciplinary committee." Jessica leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. She realized that this wasn't just about Jake Thompson. It was a systemic issue. A network had existed for years, not just to protect wrongdoers, but to maintain absolute control in the hands of a small group. Her reforms didn't just threaten Jake's career, they threatened people with much greater influence. Jessica spent the entire night poring over the documents, sorting and categorizing each piece of evidence. She knew she couldn't let this information sit on her desk. But she also understood that exposing these secrets would bring severe retaliation from those in power. The next morning, when she walked into the police station, Jessica carried with her a new resolve. She summoned Alan Rodriguez to her office and placed the stack of documents on the table. "Alan, I need you to look at this," Jessica said, her voice low but serious. "This is evidence of a protection system in our department. Jake Thompson is not just a cocky officer. He's part of this corrupt network." Alan took the documents, flipping through each page, his eyes wide with astonishment. "Oh my God, Jessica, this is a bombshell. If we bring this to light, the entire department will be shaken." Jessica nodded. "I know, but if we don't do something, everything I'm trying to change will be meaningless." Alan placed the documents down, sighing. "You've made up your mind, haven't you?" "Yes," Jessica replied, her gaze firm. "But we have to be careful. The people behind this won't back down." Together with Alan, Jessica began planning how to reveal the information without compromising the ongoing investigation. She knew the timing was critical. A small mistake could not only cost her her position, but also put her life and the lives of her supporters in danger. The underground system of privilege that Jessica had just uncovered was not only a dark secret of the police department, but also the key to everything she was trying to fix. But that only made her more determined. This time, she would not stop at Jake Thompson. She would dig deep into the roots of the injustice that the department had hidden for so long. Jessica Carter, as she promised herself, would do whatever it took to uncover the truth. The day of the first hearing had arrived. Jessica walked into the courtroom, where tension hung in the air like a heavy curtain. Ahead of her, a long table sat the council members, 5 individuals, including city officials and police department representatives. On the other side, Jake Thompson sat with his lawyer, Richard Lane. His face exuded confidence, though his eyes betrayed a hint of anxiety. Jessica placed her folder on the table, feeling the weight of the room's gaze on her. Outside the closed doors, the media waited with cameras ready. But Jessica knew this wasn't about her reputation. It was about the truth. The chairperson, Mrs. Evelyn Cross, a stern woman with sharp eyes, struck the gavel and began the hearing. We are here to examine the allegations made by Officer Jake Thompson against Police Chief Jessica Carter, as well as Chief Carter's counterclaims. This is a serious matter, and we expect all parties to maintain professionalism. Richard Lane quickly took the floor, presenting the case as if Jake were the victim of a vendetta. Ladies and gentlemen of the council, my client, Officer Jake Thompson, has devoted many years to this department. He is now the target of a personal attack by Police Chief Carter, who has used her power to suppress those who disagree with her methods. Jake nodded, his face trying to maintain composure, but Jessica could see the tension in his eyes. She sat silently, waiting for her turn. When it was Jessica's time to speak, she stood up, her gaze sweeping across the room. Her voice was clear and strong. I am not here to defend myself. I am here to defend the truth and to ensure that justice is served. Jessica presented her evidence, starting with the video footage from the parking lot capturing Jake's aggressive behavior as he shoved her into the car. The large screen in the room displayed Jake approaching her aggressively and then pushing her when she attempted to explain. The room grew heavy with tension as the footage ended, but that was just the beginning. Jessica continued, revealing documents she had received from an anonymous source pointing to a long-standing protective network within the police department, with Jake being one of its major beneficiaries. This system has been in place for years, protecting people like Officer Thompson from the consequences of their actions, Jessica said, her voice unwavering. And it has not only harmed this department, but it has also undermined the trust of the community we are sworn to protect. One council member, Frank Delaney, interrupted, his voice challenging Chief Carter. Do you think digging into the past and making such accusations will help the morale of the police department? Is your push for change causing more harm than good? Jessica turned toward him, her gaze calm but sharp. Mr. Delaney, change is never easy, and it is always met with resistance, but change is necessary. We cannot protect the community when our ranks are rotting from within. Respect and accountability are not just slogans. They must guide every action we take. The room fell silent for a moment. Jessica's words cut through the tension, reaching the minds of everyone present, including Jake. Several council members exchanged glances, recognizing the gravity of the issue. After hours of testimony, the council withdrew to deliberate. Jessica remained seated at her table, her hands clasped together, her gaze fixed straight ahead. Jake, meanwhile, occasionally whispered to Richard, but his earlier confidence had faded. When the council returned, Mrs. Evelyn Cross announced their decision. After reviewing the evidence and hearing from both sides, the council has decided to suspend Officer Jake Thompson without pay for 6 months and requires him to undergo retraining and an evaluation of his fitness for duty. Jessica sat still, but inside, she did not feel satisfied. A 6-month unpaid suspension was not a sufficient consequence for Jake's actions, and it certainly wouldn't break the protective network she had just uncovered. Jake, on the other hand, flashed a brief smile as if he had just dodged a much harsher penalty. He stood, shook Richard's hand, and walked out with an air of self-satisfaction. But Jessica knew this was only the first step. She had only begun to scratch the surface of a much deeper problem, and she was determined not to stop until the full truth was exposed. This is not the end, she told herself, her eyes following Jake as he left the room. True justice is still waiting. Jake Thompson left the hearing room with an air of smugness, but inside, he couldn't shake off the sense of unease. The words Jessica had spoken during the hearing had not only struck at his arrogance, but had begun to make him question himself. That night, as he sat alone in his small apartment, he reviewed the documents Jessica had presented. Each line felt like an accusation he couldn't ignore. Jake began to realize that what he had once thought was protecting the system was protecting a corrupt network. The protection he received from higher-ranking officers wasn't because he was a good cop, but because he fit their mold, obeyed orders without questioning, and wielded power without accountability. He realized he had been used as a pawn to maintain a system he had never truly controlled. In the following days, Jake returned to the police department, hoping things would return to normal. But the reality was far from what he expected. Colleagues who had once stood by him now began to avoid him. In the break room, conversation stopped abruptly when he entered. Some even looked at him with contempt. "You've disgraced all of us," said Officer Steve Cooper, once Jake's close friend, during a confrontation. "You think standing before the council and pleading innocence will help you? You just made all of us look worse." Jake didn't respond, silently enduring the isolation. But this estrangement was just the beginning. One night, as Jake was leaving the station after his shift, he noticed one of his tires was flat. On the windshield, there was a scrap of paper with a hastily written message: "Don't think you can get away with this without paying the price." Jake felt a chill run down his spine. He knew this was a warning from his former colleagues, people who felt betrayed by him. Yet it was this very isolation and threat that led Jake to do something he had never considered before: seek out Jessica Carter. One evening, he stood in front of her office, his hands clenched in anxiety. Finally, he knocked on the door. Jessica looked up, surprised to see Jake standing there. She said nothing, merely folding her arms and waiting for him to speak. Jake took a deep breath, his eyes filled with inner conflict. "I need to talk to you," he began, his voice low and heavy. I think I was wrong." Jessica raised an eyebrow but didn't interrupt. "I've reviewed the documents you presented," Jake continued, "and I realized what I was part of wasn't protecting the department. It was covering up the truth. I was shielded by a rotten system, and I thought that was how things were supposed to work. But now I understand that I was just a part of the problem." Jessica stayed silent, her gaze cold but thoughtful. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," Jake said, his voice trembling, "but I want to help you. I want to make things right." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as if to gauge the sincerity in his words. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, her tone anything but gentle. Jake nodded as if he had anticipated the question. "I don't expect you to trust me right away, but I have information. What I know could help you break this system, and I'm willing to step forward, even go up against those who once protected me, if it helps you expose the truth." Jessica studied him for a long moment before standing up. "Do you know what you're doing, Jake? Once you go down this path, there's no turning back. They won't just distance themselves from you. They'll find ways to destroy you." Jake smiled faintly. "They've already started, but I don't care. I've made too many mistakes in my life, and this is the only chance I have to make it right." Jessica watched him for a few more seconds before nodding. "Fine, but if you want to cooperate, we do it my way. I need everything you know, and I need absolute honesty." "I understand," Jake replied, his eyes now not filled with arrogance, but with resolve. In the days that followed, Jake began to provide Jessica with vital information about the police department's protective network. He revealed names, secret meetings, and shady dealings he had once ignored. His cooperation brought Jessica closer to exposing the full truth, but Jake's transformation wasn't without its challenges. One night, he received a call from an unfamiliar number. On the other end was the voice of a high-ranking officer he had once worked with. "I hear you've been talking to Carter," the voice said menacingly. "You'd better remember, loyalty isn't something you can buy back once it's lost." Jake didn't respond. He just quietly hung up. He knew the road he had chosen would be dangerous, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was doing the right thing. Jessica, too, noticed the change in Jake. She wasn't quick to trust him, but she couldn't deny that his help had opened doors she couldn't have broken down on her own. And though there was still a long road ahead, Their unexpected partnership had laid the groundwork for a final battle, a battle to expose the truth and dismantle the corrupt system that had lasted for so long. The unexpected collaboration between Jessica Carter and Jake Thompson had launched a large-scale investigation targeting the corruption network within the police department. Jake, with insider knowledge, provided Jessica with a list of senior officers and the misconduct they had hidden for years. Jessica knew this was her opportunity to dismantle the protection racket, but she was also fully aware that it would push both her and Jake into even greater danger. The investigation quickly caught the attention of several young officers who had previously stayed out of internal conflicts. One of them was Ryan Davis, who had sharply criticized Jessica at a department-wide meeting. Ryan had been closely following the developments since the first hearing. When he learned that Jake, whom he had once respected, had agreed to cooperate with Jessica, Ryan began questioning his loyalty. One morning, Ryan knocked on Jessica's office door. She looked up, surprised to see him. "Officer Davis, what do you want?" Jessica asked, her tone neither hostile nor dismissive, but with a trace of caution. Ryan took a deep breath before responding. "I want to help. I've seen what's going on, and I don't think I can stay silent anymore." Jessica studied his gaze for a long moment before nodding. "If you want to help, I need you to speak the truth. Everything you know." Ryan nodded, his eyes steady. "I'll testify. I've seen things I turned a blind eye to, shady exchanges and altered reports. If you need a statement, I'm ready to stand up." News of Ryan's willingness to testify spread quickly through the department. For some officers, this was a turning point. Ryan, a young man who had been fiercely loyal to Jake, was now choosing to stand by Jessica. This made many start to question the system they had been defending, while those in the corruption network saw it as a serious threat. However, the progress of the investigation was not without obstacles. One afternoon, Jessica received a call from Alan Rodriguez. His voice was tense. "Jessica, we have a problem. Some information from the investigation has been leaked, but it's been twisted." Jessica frowned. "Leaked? What do you mean?" "Fake reports are being circulated," Alan explained. "They're trying to paint the picture that you and Jake are fabricating a personal vendetta and that the documents we're using are forgeries." Jess was silent for a moment, then said with determination, "We need to control the situation. Call an emergency meeting and issue an official statement." That evening, Jessica and Alan held a press conference to address the misinformation. Amidst a barrage of questions from reporters, Jessica stood firm. "All the documents and evidence we've presented are verified. The attempts to leak false information are nothing more than desperate actions from those who refuse to face the truth. We will continue the investigation until the end." Jake also appeared at the press conference, speaking publicly for the first time. "I was part of this problem in the past, and I'm not proud of it," he said, his tone remorseful. "But I'm doing everything I can to fix my mistakes. I'm calling on others. If you know the truth, stand with us." Jake's appearance shocked many. Some officers in the department began to reconsider, feeling that maybe Jessica and Jake were indeed doing the right thing. However, those in the corruption network were not so easily deterred. In the shadows of the police department, a small group of corrupt officers met in secret. "We can't let them keep going," at least one senior officer said. "If everything is exposed, we'll lose everything." "So what do we do?" another asked. "We need to destroy their credibility before they destroy ours," the first replied, his voice cold. Jessica knew this battle was far from over, but the support from Ryan and other brave officers gave her new hope. She was not only breaking down a corrupt system, but also rebuilding trust within the department, piece by piece. However, with the schemes being plotted behind the scenes, Jessica and Jake would have to prepare for even bigger challenges in the future. The war was not over. The day of the final hearing had arrived, and the atmosphere in the room was heavier than ever. This was not just a decisive moment for the people involved, but also an opportunity for Jessica Carter to change the entire structure of the police department she had been fighting for all this time. Jessica walked into the room carrying a thick folder filled with all the evidence she and Jake Thompson had collected over the past few weeks. She had not only internal documents, but also testimonies from Jake, Ryan Davis, and other brave young officers who had chosen to speak the truth. Jake sat in the back row, his face solemn. This was the first time he appeared at a hearing, not to defend himself, but to support Jessica. Ryan was also present, his gaze resolute as he was ready to testify. The chair of the committee, Evelyn Cross, tapped her gavel to begin the hearing. We are here today to listen to and evaluate the evidence regarding the allegations of a corruption network within the police department. Chief Carter, you may begin, she said. Jessica stood up, her eyes scanning the room. She began by giving an overview of the protection racket she had uncovered, explaining how senior officers had protected each other and falsified reports for years. She opened with a video from the parking lot, emphasizing that this was the spark that ignited her investigation. Then she presented each piece of evidence. These are internal emails documenting how the leaders intentionally dismissed or erased complaints of officer misconduct, she said, her voice clear and confident. And here's a list of officers who have benefited from this system, including cases of excessive force and discrimination. A large screen in the room displayed the documents Jessica had prepared, each line of text visible. The room fell silent, with only Jessica's voice resonating. Next, she invited Jake to testify. Jake walked up, his face serious. I was part of this problem, he said, his voice deep but steady. I turned a blind eye to the wrongdoing because I thought that was the way to survive in this system. But I was wrong, and I'm ready to take responsibility. I'm here today to do the right thing. Jake recounted what he knew, from secret meetings to instances where he saw reports altered. He hid nothing, admitting his own mistakes. His testimony not only clarified the bigger picture, but also served as a genuine act of redemption. When Jake finished, one council member, Frank Delaney, tried to dismiss everything Jessica had presented. Chief Carter, all this evidence could be misunderstood. How do we know that you haven't fabricated these stories to seize power? He said, his tone mocking. Jessica stayed calm, but Alan Rodriguez, sitting in the back, stood up and handed Evelyn a document. Mrs. Cross, this is a new document we've just received from an anonymous source, Alan said. I believe it will answer Mr. Delaney's question. Evelyn flipped through the document, her eyes widening. Mr. Delaney, she said sharply, it appears your name is also on the list of officers protected by this system. Would you like to explain yourself? The room went silent. All eyes were on Delaney. His face turned bright red and he couldn't speak a word. Jessica said nothing, simply gazing at him, her expression resolute. The hearing lasted the entire day. Jessica presented further testimonies from other witnesses, including Ryan Davis. Ryan spoke about the times he saw reports altered and the pressure he faced when he chose to speak up. His words moved many in the room. When the hearing ended, Evelyn tapped her gavel and declared, after reviewing all the evidence, testimonies, and documents presented, the council has decided the officers named in the verified corruption network will be immediately terminated. We also call for a complete reform within the police department, including the appointment of an independent oversight committee. Jessica sighed in relief, but she knew this was just the beginning. The battle to rebuild trust would take time, but she had done what no one thought possible, dismantling a corruption system that had lasted far too long. Jake sat quietly in the back, feeling both a sense of relief and the weight of what lay ahead. He knew his road to redemption was still long, but he had taken the right first step. As everyone filed out of the room, he approached Jessica. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he said. Jessica nodded, her gaze no longer filled with doubt. "Keep doing the right thing, Jake. This work is never easy, but it's always worth it." The final hearing was not just a victory for Jessica, but also a ray of hope for the entire police department, where truth and justice had finally taken center stage. But for Jessa, her mission was only just beginning. After the final hearing, Jake Thompson knew that he no longer had a future in law enforcement. Although he had played a key role in exposing the truth, the mistakes of his past could not be easily forgiven. With his resignation, Jake walked out of the police department for the last time, carrying a feeling that was both empty and liberating. In the early days after leaving, Jake questioned himself more than ever. He felt lost, unsure of where to start again. But an anonymous letter he received became a turning point. The letter read, "True change begins when you accept that you can do good from your mistakes. Don't turn away from that opportunity." The message encouraged Jake to find a new purpose. He decided to move to a small town where he got a job at a youth support center. His mission was to help children from difficult backgrounds, those who had been in trouble with the law or were at risk of going down the wrong path. In the early days at the center, Jake faced numerous challenges. Many of the children did not trust him, especially when they found out he had once been a police officer. But Jake did not give up. He shared his story, the mistakes he had made, and the lessons he had learned. "Everyone has a chance to change," Jake said to a group of youth during a discussion session. "I took the wrong path for a long time, but I've learned that admitting mistakes isn't weakness, it's strength." Jake's story gradually inspired others. Some of the youth began to open up, sharing their struggles with him. Jake not only helped them find ways to overcome their problems, but also guided them to view life more positively. Little by little, he became a teacher and a friend they could trust. One late afternoon, as Jake was getting ready to leave the center, he received a call from Jessica. "I'm in your town," she said. "Are you free to meet?" Jake agreed, and they met at a small cafe. Jessica, still with her tough demeanor, but now with a gentler gaze, looked at Jake with curiosity. "I heard you're working with young people," she said, taking a sip of her coffee. "I'm not surprised. It suits you." Jake smiled. "I'm just trying to fix what I've done wrong. I've hurt too many people, Jessica, but because of you, I realized I still have a chance to change." Jessica leaned forward, her eyes focused. "Jake, I'm not the one who gave you that opportunity. You earned it yourself. Not everyone dares to face the truth, let alone change. You've done what many others couldn't." Jake looked at Jessica, filled with gratitude. "No matter what, I'll always thank you. Without you, I'd probably still be doing everything wrong, thinking I was right. You showed me a path I never even considered." Jessica smiled faintly, but her expression was serious. "What you're doing now is more important than any badge. If you help even one child avoid the wrong path, then it's all worth it." The meeting ended with a handshake, but for Jake, it was a great acknowledgement. Jessica no longer saw him as a troublemaker or an arrogant colleague, but as a man trying to make amends. In the months that followed, Jake continued his work at the center. He not only helped the youth find their direction, but also inspired his colleagues at the center who had once doubted him. His dedication, combined with his honest personal story, made people gradually trust and respect him. Jake was no longer Officer Jake Thompson of the past, but a man building a new life from the broken pieces of the old one. And in his heart, he always remembered Jessica's words, "Change isn't easy, but it's necessary." After the final hearing, Jessica Carter took on the most important task of her career, rebuilding the police department from the ground up. She knew that exposing the corruption network was just the beginning, and to regain the community's trust, she had to act thoroughly and transparently. Jessica began by working with independent experts to create a series of reform policies. Hiring processes were changed to ensure diversity and fairness. She also introduced a new training program focused on conflict resolution skills, emphasizing accountability and unbiased thinking. One of Jessica's most notable initiatives was the establishment of an independent oversight committee, consisting of community members responsible for monitoring and evaluating the police department's activities. This not only increased transparency, but also encouraged community involvement in overseeing those who were tasked with protecting them. Alan Rodriguez, who had always supported Jessica, was appointed as the official deputy chief. He led the efforts to enforce these reforms with the support of young officers who had bravely stood by Jessica's side. The initial changes were not easy. Many officers remained skeptical and secretly opposed them, but Jessica was undeterred. She frequently met with officers, held listening sessions, and directly addressed their concerns. Change isn't just about top-down commands, she said in a department-wide meeting. It's about collaboration, understanding, and commitment from all of us. Over time, the reforms began to take effect. The number of community complaints significantly decreased, and the relationship between the police department and the citizens gradually improved. Officers who had once resisted Jessica had to admit that the changes she brought about created a better working environment where responsibility and respect were prioritized. A few months later, a ceremony was held to honor Jessica and her team's reform efforts. The event took place in a large square where hundreds of people, including community members and city officials, gathered to show their support. Alan stood on the stage, giving the opening speech. Today, we not only honor an exceptional leader, but also the values she represents: fairness, transparency, and unwavering commitment. He invited Jessica to step onto the stage. A thunderous applause followed. Jessica, in her police uniform, stood confidently before the crowd. She looked around, meeting the eyes of colleagues who had once doubted her, now nodding in agreement. At the back of the crowd, she spotted Jake Thompson. He stood quietly, his eyes shining with pride as he looked at the woman who had helped him turn his life around. Jessica took a deep breath and began her speech. Change has never been easy. We faced resistance and doubt, and at times I even wanted to give up. But what kept me going was the belief that we can do better, that we have a responsibility not just to the job, but to the community we serve. She paused for a moment, scanning the crowd. Change doesn't come from power. It comes from resolve, from transparency, and from our willingness to face the truth, no matter how painful that truth might be. The applause was deafening. Jessica concluded her speech with a commitment. Our work is not over. This is just the beginning, but I believe that with all your support, we will build a police department that the community can be proud of. The ceremony ended on an uplifting note. As Jessica stepped down from the stage, Jake approached her. "You did what no one thought was possible," he said, his voice full of sincerity. "Thank you for allowing me to be a small part of this journey." Jessica looked at him, smiling. "Thank you, Jake. Your transformation has proven that anyone can fix their mistakes and do what's right. You've inspired many people, including me." Jake bowed his head in a gesture of respect before leaving, carrying a sense of relief he had never known. Jessica returned to her office, sat down at her desk, and looked out the window, where the city was slowly fading into twilight. The streetlights began to glow, reflecting a new future for the police department and the community she had dedicated her career to protecting. She knew this journey would never be easy, but it was always worth it. "We won't stop," Jessica told herself, her eyes filled with conviction, for justice, for the community, and for the future. The journey of Jessica Carter and Jake Thompson is a testament to the power of change and resilience in the fight for justice. This story makes us ask, If you were in Jessica or Jake's shoes, would you have the courage to face the truth and stand up for what's right? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want to follow more meaningful content, don't forget to like, share this video, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue bringing you inspiring stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.